I'm basically saying that psychiatry is about neurosis, and neurosis is the inability of us to submit to truth, logic, and morality. I know these terms are in dispute. We often argue with each other about what is true and what isn't true, and what is logical and what isn't logical. And most of us do argue about what is moral and what isn't. Now, these arguments about morality will intensify and get worse if we have no functioning moral system. And that is why I keep going back to the subject of moral systems that nobody seems to understand at all. I suspect that when people affect not to understand me, I suspect that when people claim not to understand me or misunderstand me, they are, I think, doing it to annoy me. It's a kind of passive aggressive behavior. They don't want to argue with me about it, I guess, so they pretend not to understand or distort it, and in that way thwart me by not giving me what I want, because basically my position is that if you agree with the facts that I am basing my arguments on, you would have to agree with me. And most of the time I get it right, and that I think explains why people pretend not to well, they like to pretend I'm evil, or they want to pretend I'm mad, or that the terms that I use are incorrect. And so they do that in order to frustrate me, of course. Sometimes they are genuinely puzzled. But then I'm very patient at explaining things again and again and again until they get angry with me because I have become a bit of a bore and repeat myself. And then what I do is discover that what I thought they should have understood a long time ago, they in fact do not understand. And then I discover they do understand it, and they were just pretending, or they were suppressing the information, and I say, shouted at me and slammed the door as they left the room. It turned out that they did really understand it after all, and they were just pretending not to, or have somehow suppressed that knowledge because they don't want to. They don't want to follow the logic of my arguments, and so they don't. And a tactic that is often used is to pick a fight with me. In the hope that I'll get angry and there'll be a bust up, and then they don't have to ever speak to me again. But I know they don't mean it. I suppose, temporarily they do. They kind of want to pick a fight with me, so they never have that conversation with me again, and they'll be saved from that annoyance. But I'm not going to give that to them. Now, I think basically, if we submitted to the system of truth, logic, and morality, there would be no need to to submit oneself to psychotherapy or psychiatry. And I'm now about to read to you the Wikipedia entry on psychiatry, the history of psychiatry. And it's actually quite an old thing because it was invented by some Persian. So it starts on the heading of History of Psychiatry. The earliest known texts on mental disorders are from ancient India and include the Ayurvedic text, Charaka Samhita. The first hospitals for curing mental illness were established in India during the 3rd century BCE. The Greeks also created early manuscripts for mental disorders. In the 4th century BCE, Hippocrates theorized that physiological abnormalities may be the root of mental disorders. In the 4th to 5th century BC, Greece in the 4th to 5th century BC, Greece, Hippocrates wrote that he visited Democritus and found him in his garden cutting open animals. Democritus explained that he was attempting to discover the cause of madness and melancholy. Hippocrates praised his work. Democritus had with him a book on madness and melancholy. During the 5th century BCE, mental disorders, especially those with the psychotic traits, were considered supernatural in origin, a view which existed throughout ancient Greece and Rome as well as Egyptian regions. Religious leaders often turned to versions of exorcism to treat mental disorders, often utilizing methods that many considered to be cruel or barbaric. Trepanning was one of those methods used throughout the history. The Islamic Golden Age fostered early studies in Islamic psychology and psychiatry, with many scholars writing about mental disorders. The Persian physician Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, also known as Razis, wrote texts about psychiatric conditions in the 9th century. As a chief physician of a hospital in Baghdad, he was also the director of one of the first psychiatric wards in the world. Two of his works, in particular, Al-Mansuri and Al-Hawi, provide descriptions and treatments for mental illnesses. Abu Zaid al-Balkhi was a Persian polymath during the 9th and 10th centuries and one of the first to classify neurotic disorders. He pioneered cognitive therapy in order to treat each of these classified neurotic disorders. He classified neurosis into 4 emotional disorders: fear and anxiety, anger and aggression, sadness and depression, and obsession. Al-Balkhi further classified 3 types of depression: normal depression or sadness, endogenous depression originating from within the body, and reactive clinical depression originating from outside the body. The first buying Maristan was founded in Baghdad in the 9th century, and several others of increasing complexity were created throughout the Arab world in the following centuries. Some of the Bami Rastans contained wards dedicated to the care of mentally ill patients, most of whom suffered from debilitating illnesses or exhibited violence. Specialist hospitals such as Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London were built in medieval Europe from the 13th century to treat mental disorders, but were used only as custodial institutions and did not provide any type of treatment. The beginning of psychiatry as a medical speciality is dated to the middle of the 19th century, although its germination can be traced to the 18th century. In the late 17th century, privately run asylums for the insane began to proliferate and expand in size. In 1713, the Bethel Hospital, Norwich, was opened, the first built the first purpose-built asylum in England. In 1656, Louis XIV of France created a public system of hospitals for those suffering from mental disorders, but as in England, no real treatment was applied. During the Enlightenment, attitudes towards mentally ill began to change. It came to be viewed It came to be viewed as a disorder that required compassionate treatment. In 1758, English physician William Batty wrote his treatise on madness, on the management of mental disorder. It was a critique aimed particularly at the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, where a conservative regime continued to use barbaric custodial treatment. Batty argued for a tailored management of patients entailing cleanliness, good food, fresh air, and distraction from friends and family. He argued that mental disorder originated from dysfunction of the material brain and body rather than the internal workings of the mind. The introduction of moral treatment was initiated independently by the French doctor Philippe Pinel and the English Quaker William Tuke. In 1792, Pinel became the chief physician at the Bicêtre Hospital. Patients were allowed to move freely about the hospital grounds, and eventually dark dungeons were replaced with sunny, well-ventilated rooms. Pinel's student and successor, Jean Esquirol, went on to establish 10 new mental hospitals that operated on the same principles. Although Tuke, Pinel, and others had tried to do away with physical restraint, it remained widespread into the 19th century. At the Lincoln Asylum in England, Robert Gardner Hill, with the support of Edward Parker Charlesworth, pioneered a mode of treatment that suited all types of patients so that mechanical restraints and coercion could be dispensed with, a situation he finally achieved in 1838. In 1839, Sergeant John Adams and Dr. John Colony were impressed by the work of Hill and introduced the method into their Hanwell Asylum, by then the largest in the country. So, what really wanted to get to Freud and Jung, really. So it talks about I talk about the Kirkbride plan, which is an architectural style meant to have a curative effect. I didn't know architecture can soothe the mentally ill. So let's have a look at the basis and philosophy of the Kirkbride plan. Oh, I think okay, maybe I don't need to read that, but I'm curious about architecture because I quite like looking at them and talking about them, but I don't really know enough. but I mustn't wander all over the place. But it's nice to know that hospitals, mental health asylums had a certain design that was supposed to be curative. So that's interesting to me, anyway. So it goes on to talk about mood disorders and delusion and irrationality. And so there were different ways of looking at mental disorders. And so they started talking about nerves. Now, finally, I've come to the bit about Freud. And Freud basically pioneered the idea of treating patients outside rather than being warehoused in asylums. And then it starts talking about different chemicals. So I don't want to talk about that. I'm really more interested in the classification of mental disorder, neurotic disorders. So let's go back again. 4 emotional disorders: fear, anxiety, anger, aggression, sadness, and depression and obsession. Sorry, the paired. So fear and anxiety, anger and aggression, sadness and depression, and obsession. Yeah, I was talking about this because I just noticed that. Okay, I'm going back to the subject of me thinking that the reason why therapy takes years, because you talk to some people and say, oh, I had to go into years of therapy, to get over the trauma of, X, Y, and Z. And I used to like the idea. I used to like the idea of being able to just pay somebody to listen to you and not be rude and say, why don't you just do this, instead of, boring me to tears about your, whatever your obsession is. And then you start hearing stories about people who, patients of therapists who suddenly discovered that the therapist had fallen asleep and wasn't taking notes at all, and and what you were paying for is the appearance of somebody who cared about you and was taking an interest in what you were saying, and they weren't at all because they clearly fallen asleep. So that can be pretty devastating, and probably worse than your friend telling you that if you just talk about your bad boyfriend one more time, they're going to tell you to dump him, or something of that nature, because we can be a bit obsessive and repetitive, and we don't want to do the thing we want to do. So women are famous for being offended when you give them the solution to their problem, because really they kind of know they have to put up with their with the job that they hate, the husband that is irritating, the children that is not up to standard, because they can't really just dump them somewhere and never see them again. So they complain, and if you can't tell the difference between them actually coming to you with a problem that they want solved, or just wanting a shoulder to cry on. You could get into trouble, or offend them greatly and then get everything wrong and upset them even more, and then get upset yourself. So psychiatry then is well, maybe they're just a desire for attention. So you see people. Um, I mean, you have seen videos of people being exorcised, haven't you? And maybe they just want a bit of attention. They get depressed, nobody's listening to them, and then they start acting weird, and then they call in the priest, and the priest gives them a lot of attention, and people kind of crowd round them, and pretend that they um, well, I mean, they are the audience, so I think, in certain cases, the patient being exorcised is sort of saying crazy things, but some of it makes sense. They're going to be making accusations against their husband, their children, their wife, whatever it is. And then once they've got it out of their chest, they'll feel better until the next time. Maybe it's a bit like us posting stuff on social media, and then maybe being listened to, being responded to, and then we do it too much, and then we get disabled from posting for varying durations, and then I don't know. So I guess what we need to do is we just need to be able to express ourselves, and it's a thin line, isn't it? Because the tramp, in theory, can say anything because nobody cares. I mean, he won't lower his status by shouting, mad, obscene things at passers-by, because he's already hit rock bottom. And I suppose if you're really powerful, you can say whatever comes into your mind, and everybody has to, submit to your rudeness, and they won't be able to call you racist, fascist, sexist, misogynist, or whatever. And it's the people, in the kind of middle echelons who really have to watch their P's and Q's because they want to get on in life, and they don't want to, become a tramp shouting at passers-by. I mean, they don't want to, be so low that it doesn't matter at all what they say, and they know that they won't be able to reach the pinnacles of being so high status that it doesn't matter what they say at all. And actually, it would matter, however high status you are. I mean, if you said crazy, stupid things, then people would think, well, you don't deserve to be high status. Let's take you down a notch or two. So speech in society is not really free. And obviously, speech hurts people. Jews already acknowledge that. They have the terminology of Yetzer Hara, which means evil speech, and they have, well, I would say, very aristocratic standards of proper speech. So it's not just a matter of not telling lies. You're not even allowed to tell the truth if the circumstances are not appropriate. So I guess it would be a bit like a flow chart. Is it permissible to say this, this thing that you want to say, and you have to go through, all the filters, but only if it is true. First check if it's true, and and then check if it's going to reflect evil on people, on an individual, and whether it is permissible to say this sort of thing to achieve a greater good, and all kinds of things of that nature. What is the purpose of these rules? It is, of course, to make social relations with people that we really want to insult and complain about rather easier. And so a lot of human status is to do with what we can and cannot say, who we may or may not insult, who we can or can't criticize. So obviously it is a matter of great importance to the individuals affected, because it's a reflection of your identity, it's a reflection of your status, and you would be understandably concerned about where you are in the pecking order of your particular society, and that is what explains the identitarian politics that is now the case in the West, because the people that we formerly thought privileged and in charge are no longer privileged and in charge. And obviously this is something that has political and moral significance for the rest of us. And for those, for them too. And I'm talking about the white heterosexual male. And so times are a-changing and things are moving on. But for the better or worse, we don't know. Oh, there are people. Yoo-hoo! You having a bad day? You hate everyone and feel alone? Well, with God, you're never alone. So, today, what have I been doing? I have been trying to get to the bottom of things. Of course, I am. That's what I always do. And I guess the reason why I'm talking about psychiatry is that, when you go into politics and you think, I'm going to solve all these problems. And you think, yeah, I've got the answer. It is actually the answer. Nobody can contradict me. And, they haven't got a better answer than me. And then you realize that there's no one in charge. And the people apparently in charge are people who just won't be letting you through because they don't have to, and they like to stop others. Not just me. They just like to put others down. And obviously, if they have the ability to disapprove of your idea and suppress it and censor it, then they're going to exercise the option of doing so because it makes them feel good to, put you down, to say you're silly, you're stupid, how dare you, the usual kind of thing. And therein lies the contradiction of people who call themselves nationalists. I mean, for years I've been trying to help them and explaining what the problem is. But because of their corrupt nature, they affect not to get it. So this is what I was saying at the beginning, that people challenge, the meaning of words. They're going to say, well, what you said, it doesn't mean what you say it means. And there are lots of important words, big words, that are in dispute, such as idolatry and blasphemy. So what Christians think is idolatry is not. No, sorry. What Jews and Muslims think is idolatry is not what Christians think is idolatry, because they worship a man. So then you have to define what idolatry means. And you obviously have to distinguish between the two different definitions of idolatry. So if you're stating it from the standpoint of Judaism and Islam, you would have to say idolatry is the worship of anything that isn't God, and confusing God and his creation. And so you can so you're basically saying, under this definition, that You can't be, I mean, God cannot be anything material because it's nothing because that is the definition of God. God is immaterial. So he's either just a lie or an idea or actually existing. So there are three options of looking at God. And these would be immaterial. So either he really exists, but he's not in material form, so you can never see him, or the idea of God is just a lie, and obviously you can't see a lie because it's an abstract noun. And then the other thing is that God is an idea, a useful idea. And I'm saying it's fine, it's serviceable, even if you think of God as just one of those things, or two of those things, or all three. I think of God as all three, and lies have users, ideas have users, and obviously, if God actually exists, then well, what a powerful being he must be, and isn't it great to know that he cares about us? But then you will come up before people who say, "Oh no, no! I mean, God may exist, but he doesn't care about us, and he doesn't bother about us as individuals because individually we're not important enough." So I'm trying to say that we might as well, for the purposes of our for the betterment of our society, we might as well believe in the most powerful God, and the most powerful God knows our hearts and minds and can do anything and is morally perfect. So, you look at this. You can't look at. I mean, you contemplate this Abrahamic God, and you can suppose that he exists. And if you derive comfort from that, well and good. Or if you can't quite bring yourself to believe in God, then you could still contemplate the possibility. So it's at one remove, in that you don't literally believe, but you think, well, if God exists, what would he think about this or that? And what would he do if he were indeed omnipotent and, omniscient, perfectly moral? So you could think that, and I think even that is useful, even if you don't completely believe in God. And that is how I think of God, really, on a contingent basis. I know there are people who believe in, other versions of God, but I wouldn't advise it, simply because you're not making the most of this idea. So if you did believe in God, you would have a ongoing relationship with him. What do I mean by an ongoing relationship? It's basically a relationship of negotiation, because people only ever talk to God, let's be honest, when they want something. And so, you can say, God, give me this thing because I deserve it, or, that's one option. And the other is, God, I really want this thing, but I know I don't deserve it because I'm a sinner and I've been a bad girl. But if I'm good, please give it to me. And then you start being good, or you try to be, and you would know if how good you've been, or how much of a failure you are at being good. So you would know, and in your mind you would be kind of making notes about what you tried to do that was better, and so I think doing even that would be would just make us better people, even if it's just as a means to an end, because we want that thing that we want. We want that. Or whatever it is you want, your successful career, your love object, your ambition, whatever it is. So having this ongoing relationship with a hypothetical supreme authority will mean that you will be always checking on your behavior, and to know um, if you've behaved well according to the um, view of the hypothetical supreme authority. And I think this would be a good way of reprogramming ourselves into being, better people, and, being more philosophical about the bad things we have to endure, being more humble, so that we submit to correction sooner rather than later. Because what is happening now is that most people are atheists and nihilists, and they're just mean to you because they can, because they just don't see why you should succeed where they have failed, and even if they think that you deserve to succeed, they won't do it. It's just that there's some evil inclination in them that wants to make you, that wants to make them trip you up, or you know expose you in some way, embarrass you, and hurt you because because they can, and it, the that's how they get their kicks. They I mean, that's how vandals get their kicks, really. They can't build, they can't make something nicer, but they can easily make it they can damage it and make it look worse with their graffiti. So but because they want to make a mark on the world around them, that's what they do, and it doesn't matter if they make it uglier. It's an assertion of their presence on earth, and so they have to be mean to other people in order to feel that they exist. So that is basically the um, tawdry egotism of most people who are not guided by morality, because they would be just indulging their ego, and their ego says, well, I don't want you to have that thing, not because I dislike you even, but it just pleases me to deprive you of this thing, because it gives me a sense of power, because I'm an atheist and I'm a nihilist, and um, it just gives me a kick to hurt your feelings, thwart your ambitions, make you feel small, and this is how I get my kicks. Ha 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 ha. So I think this is really the problem in the West today. Most people think that, either in the upper echelons of society, or bumping along at the bottom with not very educated people, not very nice people who are neurotic and unpleasant. But I'm just inviting you to consider a situation in which um, people acknowledge the truth, use logic, and had a kind of pecking order of priorities and status. So then everything would be done. All the problems would be, well, not all, but most of the problems would be avoided, or solved in a fraction of the time. And there will be somebody in charge, and you can go to them, and they'll actually want to sort it out, and not just want to kick you around just because it gratifies their ego to kick you around and pretend not to understand what you're saying. Um, and so obviously it's very depressing when you get so many people behaving like that. But I'm saying it's really a symptom of a greater malaise, and part of our culture, I'm afraid, that people are just malicious for no reason at all, or neurotic because they may know it's important. They may even know that what you're doing is for their benefit, but because they don't want to do it, they don't want to admit that they're wrong, um, they just won't do it. What is this to do with psychiatry? Well, obviously it's a form of neurosis, isn't it? I mean, neurosis is basically when, what you're doing doesn't make sense and it is not benefiting you. So one of the other things that I've done today is it's not, it's like, look, I know you hate secular Quranism, and I know you hate Muslims, but secular Quranism is the only moral system that could, in theory, address all the problems that bother you. And it's immigration. I know it's immigration, and then they retreat, to the position. And I've seen this over so many years. First they say this is a problem, I hate it, and then you say, well, this is the solution. And then, because they hate the solution so much, and they'll say things like, oh, but the cure is worse than the disease. And then they pretend that what they were complaining about isn't a problem after all, because your cure is so much worse than the disease. And then they'll forget again, and then slowly they'll be complaining about the same problem, and then you go through the same cycle with them and say, look, secular Quran, oh no, the disease is worse and the cure is worse than the disease. We don't want any, we don't want your cure, thank you. We'd rather live with the disease, and then they start complaining about the disease again. So that is a description of the neurosis that basically afflicts Western man. Stephen James has popped up. Good. Yes, Stephen James says, God is the uncaused first cause, and it's actually a non sequitur. I mean, either God, the Abrahamic God, exists with all the attributes that he's supposed to have. That he is a living God, he is omnipotent, he is omniscient, and he's perfectly moral. So he, what he'll do eventually, obviously not now, because our lives are the theory is that our lives are in this world is an examination hall, and the next life will be just so much better than anything we could ever imagine. So that's the story. I mean, that's what the Muslims say, and that's what the Jews say when they talk about their ulam haba, their life in the world to come. And the Orthodox Jews will say that the worst thing that could happen to you in this life is to lose any hope of there being any life in the world to come. So we're either going to be pleasantly surprised or in for a big fat disappointment if it doesn't happen at all. But just because God is the uncaused first cause doesn't mean gives us no clue at all about whether he knows our hearts and minds. So here is a way of looking at things. You have the Abrahamic God, that is the most powerful being conceivable. But obviously for some of you, you'll find him hard to believe, and so you don't believe, and there are a few people like Jen Schaff who says things like, "Oh, I do worship a God, but that God is indifferent. But he is the only God because there is only one universe, and that's it really." So because that it is an indifferent God, we don't, he won't punish or reward us. So that is really the difference between pantheism and belief in the Abrahamic God, who knows our hearts and minds and will reward good and evil, absolutely, either in this life or the next. So if you believe in the pantheist God, you might as well be atheist, really, because yes, life can be enjoyed. There's sex, there's shopping, there's being mean to people and getting away with it and laughing at their uh, failures and that kind of thing. These things give some people pleasure. In fact, the Germans even have a word for it called Schadenfreude. So life can be enjoyed as an atheist if you like that sort of thing. But for many, we want there to be justice in this life and the next. And so there are people who choose to believe in this Abrahamic God who knows our hearts and minds and will reward good and evil in this life and the next. And the benefits of so doing means that they can deal with, they would have a greater fortitude with which to deal with the disappointments and frustrations of life, and behave better towards others. So that's a benefit, and that would be a benefit to society. And they can maybe keep their sanity a bit longer and maybe keep their important relationships longer, so they don't get divorced or that kind of thing, and get along better with the people they're supposed to get on with, their colleagues, their political associates, that kind of thing. So I suppose the problem for some people is, but I just can't believe in it. It's so stupid. I just can't, and I get that. But one of the things that atheists mock theists is that, your sky daddy, your magic invisible friend. But even as theists are mocked by atheists, there was actually a reason why Sky Daddy was created, and I think it was created by child psychologists. They have a child that's troubled, and they basically introduce to the child the idea of a magic invisible friend with whom they can discuss anything and who will not betray them. And obviously this has produced enough good results for the practice to carry on. I don't know if they still do it now. I don't know, but obviously this is kind of God for kids, right? Or God for atheist kids. But I think there are distinct advantages for entering into this kind of relationship, because if you do, you kind of have a track record. You'll have, I guess, a series of interactions. It's a bit like playing chess with yourself. So, you kind of imagine, this sort of imaginary conversation, in which you kind of imagine yourself knocking on the door of God and asking, and he says yes, and you can I come in? And then you finally get round to your business of, what you want and why you deserve it, or, how you're going to pay it back on credit, if you don't just deserve it. And just doing that would put you on track to cultivating a personal relationship with God. And that's why in Judaism they encourage Jews to use their own words. It's not just the usual prayers, the set prayers that everybody knows. You're supposed to talk in these terms to God. Now, what is this to do with psychiatry? Obviously it's cheaper, right? And also it will just make you get round to sorting your problems out quicker, because if you are addressing God as a supplicant, as a supplicant and an applicant, then you want your application to be successful, and your application is going to be more likely to succeed if you know what the rules are, if you know what the Abrahamic God approves of and disapproves of. So you know that if you're some serial killing sex offender, you're not you shouldn't really expect to get what you want. So if these rules are the same for everyone, then people will just avoid murdering and stealing and committing sexual offences against each other. You know my theory about how decline in any advanced civilization always happens when an imperial nation becomes a victim of its own success. So it becomes so rich and so powerful that it actually thinks of itself as being invulnerable. And then when they do, prideful behavior sets in, and they think they can get away with murder. And for a while they seem to get away with murder until they get used to murdering people for fun, for example, and then they will create a backlash for themselves, because yes, you probably it's like shoplifting. Maybe you get away with it once or twice, and then but then the sin of it is its own punishment. When you think, well, you're going to get away with it this time, and you do it until you get caught, and then there's big trouble, and you have a criminal record, and people think ill of you, and that sort of thing. So So to sum up, I am saying that a lot of the solutions are obvious to the problems we have. It's just that nobody will listen, and they're not listening because they're too busy indulging in the 7 deadly sins of anger, pride, sloth, lust, gluttony, greed, and anger. So these are the 7 deadly sins that will prevent us from solving our problems sooner rather than later. And then there'll be the 7 no-hide laws, and I guess the prideful will say, oh well, I don't want to forbid idolatry and blasphemy. And the thing is, secular Quranism doesn't forbid idolatry and blasphemy, because well, there's no verse in the Quran that even says anything like that. But you see, the rabbis, they won't do it. They won't rank the 4 Gentile religions because A, they're scared of their Christian overlords, and B, they don't like me telling them what to do. It's like, who am I to tell God's chosen people what they ought to do with their 7 no-hide laws? So they're not taking it from me, but they also know that never once in 2,000 years of history did they ever try to teach the no-hide laws to Christians. And that's why Christians have had 3 global Christian empires. And as for the Muslims, the kind of, let them go to hell. We never liked Jews. It'd be fun to have them, to watch them being converted to Christianity, and and then being cursed by God. That would be fun to watch. Because there are lots of anti-Semites in the Ummah. So basically, I think I'm quite fair in in telling Jews and Christians and Muslims things about themselves that they don't want to hear. And obviously, if they, really believed in God, then they would, be mortified and think, oh dear, if we done wrong, we better correct ourselves and do as Claire says, because it's logical and true what she says. But they're going to be, fighting me for the other half of eternity, I suppose, because, they don't want me to be right and they wrong. So, pride is indeed a deadly sin. And in the meantime, things will get worse and more people will suffer and the problem will be harder to fix the longer they let it happen. But, well, talking about it helps for me because I think I've explained to myself the problem a little better, and I'll read the chat again. So Stephen James was saying God doesn't know our hearts and minds. And I was saying it doesn't matter, it doesn't even matter if he doesn't exist. You can behave as if he did, and it will take on a reality of its own once you get used to this practice of cultivating a relationship with God. So I think Evelyn, for you, understands and agrees. With what I'm saying, I don't know what he means by I hate the your dog, my dog idea. I don't know what you mean by that. Well, if you're having a bad day, a rest is, sorry, a change is as good as a rest. I find that, quite a lot of interesting thoughts come to my mind when I'm away from the computer. I mean, it's just that, when you're walking or doing the dishes or doing something else that maybe you don't even want to do, ideas come to your head. And even doing what you hate to do will somehow be worth it in the end. So so I've spoken about an hour. Thank you all for showing up. That's pretty good, getting around 10 of you. So it's quite similar to the my secondary channel. This is my tertiary channel because I got a strike for that one with Justin Parker, and it was my fault because I mentioned the 3rd of November and stated my view on it. And obviously what I want to do is, we all want to be on the right side, the good side. And obviously if we're on the right side, we want that side to win. And we don't know if we will. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight the good fight. Because how else are we going to test ourselves for our fitness to go to the better place in the afterlife? And even if you don't believe in that, it may please you to contemplate it. It will, I'm sure, give you pleasure to think of such a thing. The verses in the Quran are really quite seductive, I would say. It's a very consumerist sex and shopping kind of heaven, and with water features and some people say it's not so, what's the word? Perhaps it's too seductive. But the thing is, it doesn't matter because it gives you pleasure to contemplate such a heaven, and you might think, oh, but even so, I'll get bored. What should I? Is there any possibility of reincarnation? And but maybe the most perfect heaven is exactly the heaven that you want. So. And even if you don't know if there is an afterlife, there are distinct pleasures to be gained from contemplating the kind of heaven that you would like to have if it were up to you to plan and request it. Stephen James has an interesting question. Putting aside the utility of believing in the thing, how can you reason away the implausible naivety of the Torah Old Testament stories? Well, actually, I don't think you have read the stories, because I don't think that's the really stupid story is the New Testament story, right? I mean, honestly, that's just so stupid. It's like, man gets himself crucified, and it's like, what did he do wrong? And what does he even mean on, when he says all the stuff on Sermon on the Mount? And I really think that's a really dumb bit. But you have stories like Samson and Delilah, and well, even the story of Adam and Eve. It's very nuanced. It's very layered. Um, I recommend that you listen to the better rabbis. Okay, you know which rabbis I like, but there's a kind of cycle of readings, and they go through the same thing, Adam and Eve, and Moses and whatever, and until they go through the five, until they go through the Torah, and then they start again. But there are no miracles. I mean, it's all about difficult choices, wars, sin. It's a kind of repeating soap opera, I would say. And you think, oh well, what would I have done? And it's not simple, I wouldn't say, because these are not fake situations of miracles only. It's about real life dilemmas and sins and problems of kinship and all that. So I don't think it's just, they're not fairy stories, and even fairy stories did have a moral dimension, if you're old enough to read them, because not all fairy stories ended happily, did they? If you read Grimm's or Hans Christian Andersen, it's like they're not all happy. I mean, The Little Mermaid is really a very sad story of suffering, and yeah, I mean, some of them are really quite cruel. So even children's fairy stories were not, morally simplistic. I have stuck to the question. All right. I'm not going to answer any more questions. What was beads counting stuff? What do you mean by that? Well, maybe next time you should give me a moral dilemma. I mean, today I'm just talking to you about, a mental technique, basically. And I suppose you won't really know whether God exists or not, because you think, okay, I got my thing, and I did pray to God, but would I have got it anyway? You don't know, but you might continue with it because you find it useful, you find it therapeutic, because the thing about prayer is that you have to ask for the thing, right? You say, you focus your mind when you ask for something. And when you ask for something, you have to use words. And when you use words, you use ideas. And I guess my legal training tells me that if you want to ask for something, ask for it properly, and ask for it precisely, but ask for it accurately. Not some sort of vague, stupid thing like, "Oh God, just keep me happy." It's like, no, you have to ask for some specific thing, or you're just not going to get it. In the same way that you won't get a decent present if you don't drop enough good hints, or if that person doesn't know you. And then but when you try to tell the person, or you hint to the person what you want, it's like, do you actually tell them what you really want? Or you kind of give them an idea that if it's anything from that particular shop, or that sort of thing, or that sort of price, or then you have to start thinking properly. And when you do you get what you want? Or anyway, so the whole thing is the honing of your judgment and your ability to use ideas and express them properly. And if God doesn't exist, you will at least know what you want, and it focuses your mind when you express your own wishes accurately. Stephen James, you're really not getting my idea at all. It's not so much that God doesn't know your mind. It's just that you must know your mind, so you know what to ask for. So if you have nothing to ask for, then don't ask for anything, right? And then I guess you don't need the idea of God at all. But if you do want something, you need to focus on the idea and visualize it. All right, I'm off. Thanks for listening.